welcome you to the digital airwaves of Storyophonic. I'm Dan Kimbell. With this ongoing conversation series, we present the people, the personalities, and the perspectives of the modern music business through conversations with those in the spotlight and those behind the scenes. It's our objective to entertain and inform you as we reveal tips and tales from deep inside the music industry. This Storyophonic episode is sponsored by Stax Records, nominated for 2 2024 Grammys for Written in Their Soul, the Stax Songwriter Demos. It's been a 17-year labor of love as producer Cheryl Pawelski selected 146 songs from 665 possible choices for an amazing 7-CD box set. Through the wizardry of mastering and restoration engineer Michael Graves, these recordings, barebones performances to full funk horn-driven testimonials, represent a vital link in American music. I'm Dan Kimbell at Osiris Studio with Cheryl and Michael to share the magic on Storyophonic. Great to be up here in beautiful rain-shrouded Altadena today in your studio.
So glad to have you.
All right, and we are going to be talking about this amazing project. Most of our listeners are probably pretty well versed in this, but for those of you that are not, I want to just say what a demo is. So demo is short for demonstration. It's a method for presenting songs to artists, or in some cases publishing companies or labels. So it's the songwriter's representation of the song. And then from that point on, it's either used, recorded by an artist or not. The key fact is that most people don't hear demos. However, on Written in Their Soul, we get to hear the demos. So I think that's an amazing thing. So just from the numbers, Cheryl, 1,300 tapes, 2,000 hours of music, 7 hours, 29 minutes, and 40 seconds of completed music.
Give or take.
Oh, my goodness. All right. But just please introduce us to why this project and how you became involved.
At the time, I was working at Concord Records. They had bought the Fantasy catalog, and Fantasy had bought other little labels, right? That's the way things go. They like the big fish eat the little fish. So Fantasy had all these great jazz labels, Riverside, Milestone, Pablo, Prestige, Fantasy itself, but it also had the Specialty Records catalog. You will know Little Richard, especially from that catalog, and the Stax Records catalog post-May of 1968. And the earlier part of the Stax catalog resides with Warner Music Group. So I happened to start working at Concord the year before Stax's 50th anniversary. And of course, Concord, with this new acquisition, really wanted to celebrate the 50th of Stax, being that it's a really important American label, right? It's basically the soundtrack to the civil rights movement in this country in the last century. Well, the second half of last century, to be exact. But so I was looking for things to do that weren't necessarily the usual things for a 50th, right? Like we were going to have to do a sort of best of the label. And so we pulled together a double disc and brought some of the material in from the Warner eras and did the first combined retrospective of the label. And that was nice. But I was interested in also telling some other stories about the label. It was so beloved a label by the time I got to it, most everything had been done. But as I was walking through the vault up in Berkeley of the Fantasy tapes, I kept seeing all these tapes. It was like 1-inch 8 tracks of Homer Banks demos. And I knew who Homer Banks was. He was really an important songwriter for Stax. He was part of their little group of songwriters. And I just wanted to hear all that stuff. But I knew that they weren't going to let me go on any fishing expedition because rolling off the amount of tape that I was looking at, it's just, and I couldn't assure anybody that there would be a project there. I'm a really big fan of hearing songwriters' demos because I feel like oftentimes you're getting the essence of the song, right? Because it's coming from the person who has all of the intent and meaning behind it. And sometimes artists get it right. Sometimes they get it wrong in the production of the song. Sometimes they improve on the demo. And I think that's always the hope. But I wanted to hear this stuff, you know? So I was trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? And I had a sampler from Rondor Music Publishing. It was a promotional sampler that had one, I think it was either Sam Dees or Frederick Knight. It was an unissued track. It was a demo. And I'm like, I need to go see my friends at Rondor and see what they've got. So they said, sure, you know, we've got stuff from the East Memphis catalog. That was the publisher for Stax, of the biggest amount of material that they had. And they said, but there's a problem. And I said, okay, well, I could deal. They said, well, we took all of the original analog tapes or acetates or whatever, and we put them all on DATs. And I said, oh yeah, that's a problem. Okay, but you know, and they said it wasn't just the Stax stuff; it was everything that we publish. And I said, okay, I can go fishing and find that stuff. So let me at the DATs. And they were like, well, the DATs started going bad. And I said, oh yeah, I know what that sounds like. And I said, okay, well then, what do we do? What did you do? And they said, well, we put them all on drives. And I went, okay, so could I have the drives, please? And so they allowed me to copy a range of drives that they thought had the most amount of East Memphis material in it. And so in between the numbers that you cited, you know, there was about 1,300 globs of audio that were 90 to 100 minutes long of everything that they published. What took so long was listening through it all and pulling out tracks that I thought were Stax Songwriting Demos. And I wound up with 665 of those as of November 2019. And still didn't know if I had a project because I've moved on. I started my own label. I'm no longer an agent of that company.
So it takes us to Michael Graves now. So what came to you and in what form did it come to you?
We transfer links. That's what I got.
Okay.
Or Dropbox links. There was I guess Cheryl had divided up into individual WAV files from these DATs. So I got files that were named, DAT 0156-4, and along with the sheet that's corresponded.
C3PO.
Yeah.
R2D2.
and there was a lot. I forgot how many we started off with. Probably.
665.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, in the process of transferring these to DATs, which for our listeners, that's digital audio tape, some tapes were possibly not played correctly.
There were a few things to deal with the DAT. The easy part was me, receiving these deliverable files. But the biggest problem were just the DAT has a certain sound to it, sort of a thin sound. And if you know anything about Stax records, that sound was anything but that. So I have got little tricks that I can do to sort of, lack of a better word, analog it up a little bit. So I can take a digital harsh sounding recording and sort of warm it up and make it sound more like it should. So that happened across the board for pretty much all of these. But there were a few tapes that were 2-track tapes and they were played on a 1-track head or vice versa. So there was a lot of that to untangle. But the biggest thing, there was about 5 or 6 tapes where the tapes were transferred upside down. And what that means is if you're unfamiliar with tape, there's one side has all the sound, and the other side is basically holding that tape together. And unless you know tape, it can be hard to distinguish the top from the back. So I always think that maybe there was some intern at the publishing company, and somebody gave them a stack of tapes, and they said, "Get busy," and they load the tapes up and just press play and record and did their thing. So if you play a tape upside down, you'll hear sound. It's going to sound like there's a pillow over it. It'll sound really bad, but you'll get sound. So maybe they just thought, this is an old tape. This is how it sounds, and let's let it run. So we had some of those to deal with. I've experienced a lot of weird sounds that I've had to deal with over the years, or problematic recordings, and that's something I hadn't had to deal with, and just had to figure out a new way to make it sound good.
I think you described this project as the greatest hits of audio anomalies.
That's right. Yeah. So say, it's sort of everything I've been doing this audio restoration thing for over 20 years now, and I feel like everything I've learned from all these different projects from all over the world has sort of led me to this point, because it had everything.
In listening to the project, which I've been doing obsessively, sometimes the sparser song demos are particularly revealing. So you might hear something with just a guitar and maybe some skeletal other instruments. It's not immediately apparent because it retains the same intensity and performance many times, and you don't realize what's missing when you hear what's there.
Well, the songs are so good.
Yeah, well.
And that's the thing about
And
this.
the musicians are so good.
Yeah.
When I used to tell people, when I was working on this, I would occasionally have people come in the studio, and I'd give them okay, you can't tell anybody, but these are demos, and I'd say, put aside what you think a demo is. Mm-hmm. These are Stax songwriters or Stax musicians, and they're in a great studio. They're all top drawer as far as what they do. So when they get inspired to record a song, they lay it down perfectly.
Right, and that's one of the things that was unique about Stax is the publishing company was down the hall from the studio, and they had multiple studios going. And one of our co-producers, Miss Deanie Parker, she was a songwriter, an artist, the long-term publicist. I think the first chairwoman of the Soulsville Foundation, all this stuff, right? She's the lifer. But she'd say, oh yeah, they'd come down and they'd pull people out of their offices to go sing background on a demo. And, it was a factory family affair, sort of, I mean, they were cranking all these great songs out, but, everybody was talented in the building, right? So you could just pull somebody in and it's just like, somebody play piano on this, and I think that's what we hear some of that in the demos. We also hear things that are charmingly out of tune, like Mac Rice. Mac Rice could not tune a guitar to say. Deanie said something, or Bobby Manuel, I can't remember which, but it was that I think it was Bobby. He told Bobby that, well, they tuned it at the factory. And then I bought it, and it was, like it's good. It's going to be in tune forever.
Yeah, who made the man? And I mean, it's quite amazing. But across the board, I wrote the word joyous because that was really when I hear these performances. Sure, they're sad songs and they broke my heart songs. There's some of that, but the performances are so. Yeah. Really, because they're really selling this idea of the song, and a great deal of joy comes through in just listening to the project.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first ones I found was 6345789, and it was just Steve Cropper and Eddie Floyd, which is just amazing to imagine that all on its own, and it had this really stark sort of vibe to it, and it was in some way it was really. Yeah, kind of like a perfunctory performance, it was just a demonstration. But after I found that one, I'm like, I need to hear more of that. Mm-hmm. And so I just kept going. And that was the thing. It's every time I found another one like that, I just wanted to hear what was around the next corner. And because this was everything that Rondor published, if you go back and look in Omnivore's discography, I think it was 2014 or 15, there was a Gene Clark project that came out called the White Light Demos. Those demos were in these demos. And I found that as I was looking for the Stax demos. So that's an example of the other stuff that I was going through. I didn't mind listening to any of that stuff. There was enormous amounts of stuff that I've never heard, that you've never heard, because they were never released, like Broadway show tunes for shows that never happened, right? So there was no way to like pinpoint any of it. But so there was a lot to get through, but every time I thought, I don't really want to listen to this stuff again, I would find another one. And I'd be like, damn it.
Well, back to what you were saying about how joyous the music sounds. A lot of what we specialize in historical audio and catalog work. And a lot of times projects we do, they will end up in museums or archives or Library of Congress or whatever research libraries.
More your stuff, mister.
Yeah, well, but this one absolutely belongs in a research facility. But it's also just great for a summer party playlist. It's so great.
I tried that. I tried that with it last Thursday. I had some people come over to the house, and I put it on kind of in the background. We're there, and after about 20 minutes, somebody's like, "What is this we're listening to?" Because it didn't sound like anything else. It's amazing. You think of a song like 6, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. How radical it is. You've got a chorus in a song that's got no words.
Right.
It's just numbers. I mean, things like that you don't really think about.
They said.
Eddie
said, "What would it be like to write a song with just numbers?" That's what
He's like, and that's what we came up with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, brother. But yeah, the other thing that's really kind of nice about the set is it's not just guitar and vocal or piano and vocal. Some of these are fully fleshed out, and I took some liberties with that because some of them are clearly outtakes, just missing a last instrument, and they were abandoned for some reason for a final release. I think the liberty I took was these were filed with the publisher for a reason, and so I'm gonna this is a demo until it's released. In fact, the last 3 CDs on this set are all previously unreleased songs, and that's a harder thing to get cleared because you need the writer's approval. It's called a first use song, right? So, everything that came out on the first 4 discs, those songs have been released by artists across various labels. The last 3, though, were challenging because some of these writers are no longer with us. We had estates to deal with if we could even find them. So there are some songs that are kind of kicked into a little file that hopefully someday will see the light of day. But
the parameters of the project changed in the middle of the project because the majority of the work that I had to work with were DATs, like we talked about. But near the end,
files.
Yeah, files, right? Yeah, files, not DATs. Files from the DATs. But we did get some tapes near the end, and we knew we were going to get some tapes, and those came. Part of them were already in the Stax Museum, but a lot of them came from Robert Gordon, the filmmaker, and also he's co-producer
liner note
writer.
Yep.
He was, Stax enthusiasts back in the day knew that the building was about to be demolished, and they knew there was probably some tapes there, so they went to try to see what they could find. And
the building had been condemned, right? So he hopped a fence to get into this thing.
And the part of the roof is gone, so they found this old cabinet with, all the rain and everything has been coming down this thing over the years, and they found a box with tapes, and he tells his story. There's salamanders and mice and stuff running all around him, but they want those tapes, and they got them. And they were in. You've seen pictures. They were in really bad state. They were moldy and crushed and all kind of messed. But the reason I'm talking about the tapes is we found some Staple Singer rehearsal demos, and you said these are so great. We can't. Never not hear them.
Well, and the Staples weren't writing a lot of their own material, right? They were interpreting songs by Mac Rice and Miss Betty Crutcher and other folks. And so there really wasn't a way to represent them until we got this rehearsal. I think it was for Soul Folk in Action. And it was an in-studio rehearsal of them just running down some of the songs that also happened to be by the songwriters that are featured on this set. So I thought, wow, this is a really nice in-between. And I also felt, I think it's 4 songs. If we didn't use it, there's already been all the Staple Singers box sets they're going to be. This would just be an orphan session, and it was so good. And I really wanted their presence on this set because obviously they were really important artists.
Hearing Mavis Staples under any conditions.
For sure.
Life-changing.
Yeah.
Who's going to complain about that?
Who's going to complain about that?
So we couldn't leave those behind.
Nice.
That was nice to get.
This period of time in music, regionalism was still very much an element that we had. So we especially think about soul music. We think about what came from Detroit had a certain thing. What came from Chicago was more blues-based. Philly with the orchestral thing. The Stax thing, I always think of it as horn-driven, funkier, It was definitely urban, but it had also had a kind of a rural quality. So sometimes when I hear these demos, it's almost like it returns those songs to a blues
Yeah.
influence or a chain gang or a field holler or just
and also
some
church.
and church,
Right?
of course, always.
Came right out of
Always,
church.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. I Stax, for some reason, out of pretty much all the soul music in the world, I feel it. I feel it more. And I've seen it described as gritty and all kinds of things, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's got more soul. It's got extra soul.
One track that really popped out to me is Slow Train
Yeah.
by William Bell. And that had that. It sounded like 200 years of history was in that sound.
Right.
I understand that was a bit of a restoration.
That was on one of the tapes that Robert, is either from the tapes that Robert rescued or some of the tapes that were, those were probably from the Stax Museum.
We had two versions of that. We had, same recording, but one had come out of that DAT drive pile, and then we got a better source on it
From one of the tapes.
From one of the tapes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I like when the people change genders depending.
Yeah.
So you've got Henderson Thigpen backed by a spectral wah-wah pedal, I may add. He's not playing one woman, he's playing two women.
That's right.
Having a conversation. So that was unexpected.
Well, it's of its era, right? People would sing. They were cross genders based on who they thought they were going to pitch the song to, right? Yeah. So if they were going to pitch something to Carla Thomas, they're going to sing it from a woman's perspective, and that wasn't I don't think that was the thing that bugged Mr. Thigpen. When I first played it for him, we did a little round table in Memphis for some of the songs or performers I couldn't identify, because going back to the DATs, they did have some of them had stuff written on them, but some of it was completely illegible. Some of them didn't have anything written on them. So I couldn't tell 100% what the songs were called or who was singing them. So that left me kind of nowhere. So I needed to bring in the experts, and so Mr. Thigpen agreed to come up to Memphis for this round table along with Mr. William Bell and Mr. Bob Emanuel and Miss Parker. Who am I forgetting? Robert was there. But it was great because at a certain point we just started. We were playing the songs that we didn't know who they were, but we played woman to woman, and Miss Parker had brought some of the kids in from the Soulsville school, right? From they have a charter school right next to the museum now, to run cameras and just to listen, because they were studying songwriting and stuff. And so we put on Woman to Woman, and it wasn't, I don't think it was singing from a woman's perspective. I think it was the high notes that he was going to hit. And so we played this song, and the kids in the back, after the song stopped, they all snapped. And he got teary-eyed, and he looked over at me and he said, "You're not putting that on this record, are you?" And I said, "I am, Mr. Thigpen." And he said, and I said, "I'm not changing a thing." He was like, "Well, all right."
Well, he also tells a story about how who eventually sang the song.
Shirley Brown.
That's right. He coached her on how to sing that first part,
Oh,
how to vocalize that first part.
The sort of narrative part. Yeah. He took a day off from driving trucks,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
Just to drive up, because he lives in Mississippi, and he drove up to instruct her how to properly articulate that point of view. I can't remember if it was Shirley or Barbara who he was.
The songwriters, there's a lot of colloquialisms and everyday conversational elements in the songs. And one of the things I was thinking about with these writers was, I know a lot of them, it wasn't like the Brill Building where maybe that was a job. Maybe this was, they drove a truck, or maybe they had another thing that they did. Or, in the case of Deanie Parker, there was a lot of different things that she did. And I think that exposure maybe to the wider world and their conversations or their scenarios might have, really added to the humanity of what we hear of the songs.
I think so. And Mr. Thigpen tells a story about, so there's a briefcase that has now been donated to the Stax Museum, and he said he went out and he got a briefcase and he would carry it in every day that he was there, not driving trucks, because he saw all the really successful songwriters were carrying briefcases. So he still had it, and he donated it to the museum after this whole project, because I think he did realize, that his work was important and it really touched people. And so, you talk about that sort of humanity, I mean, he expressed that's what he was reaching for all the time in his songs,
It's great to hear the great Carla Thomas, as always.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Rufus Thomas, who's really from a different era.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The world's oldest teenager, as he billed himself. But he was from the 40s and early 50s, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
He had quite a long career, even as a DJ. Up to that point, he was at WDAI in Memphis. But you can still see him in his short pants and his big white socks or boots and watch stacks. He was very present.
Yeah.
For a long time.
That's great. So you mentioned Deanie Parker.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Deanie Parker for a while. Well, did all things to all people, certainly multidisciplinary with a lot of abilities.
Yeah, she's formidable.
Yeah.
When I first met her, I was introduced via the Concord route through the lovely people at Fantasy up in Berkeley, and they had a long relationship with Stax, and I would go over to Memphis a bit in those years that I worked there, just because we're working on the 50th and everything. And so they set me up with Deanie one time. And, I think we liked each other right away. But, she is a force of nature. And if I walked in and I was a big old hoser, she would have dismissed me immediately. So I did my best to make sense and assure her that I was sliming around Memphis for all the right reasons,
We'll be right back. This special Storyophonic episode is sponsored by Stax Records, with 2 2024 Grammy nominations, Best Historical Album and Best Album Notes for Written in Their Soul, featuring 146 songwriter demos from the vaults of the legendary Stax Records. I was not familiar with, I know Albert King recorded a version of it, but the song Santa Claus Wants Some Lovin'?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's, what a good
I know.
boy.
I think we have a little video maybe coming out today.
That's a nasty kind of Santa Claus. He sounded like he wants
Well, that's why I wanted a video of it this year. Are you kidding? That's a good one. I think that's the only Christmas track, right?
I think so, yeah.
One of the songs that I had never heard before and just blew me out of the water was What Would I Do Without Your Love by Leon Moore.
Yeah.
Starts it with a horn. He does kind of a horn sound with his lips at the beginning to kind of indicate that. And then it's an amazing performance.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
There were some of these. It's funny what people pull out because nobody has pulled out the same songs to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really interesting, and I think it's a testament to how strong this material is and how people, you find your own entry points into music and songs in general, and it's personalized. And it might hit you on, one thing might hit you on a day that it doesn't on another day, right? But that one, both of these tracks that we just talked about, Santa Claus Wants Some Lovin', I hate it when Christmas tracks just appear in the middle of an album, right? So I was like, maybe we should leave that off. And the same thing with the Leon Moore. It was audio challenged, and it doesn't reveal itself right away. What's special about that song? So you kind of have to get through a little rough patch of somebody going doom 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 doom, And but when you get to the chorus, it's just beautiful. And so, I made deals with myself on what to include and what not to include. And I don't know, it's the ones that one really would not let themselves be thrown off. You know?
There's so much material on this. It can be daunting, but there's not a clinker on any of this stuff. No.
I mean, there were some things I would call Mike, and I'm like, this has to go on, so you have to make it better. And he's like, I can only do so much. And I'm like, I don't believe that.
So then I look at it and I stare at it and I think about it and I come back the next day and I try to figure out what to do. Well, this is one of the things in the middle of this project when we had these backwards tapes or upside down tapes, I had reached the end of what I could do with it. And there was the vocals were always the messed up part, but the rest of the band always sounded great, but the vocals, there was always distortion on the vocals. And I lived with that for a couple of weeks thinking, well, this is the best I can do. That's all I can do. Then
I'm on the phone going, no, it's not.
I know, right? Yeah. Okay, I'll try. And then this is about the time that demixing started to become something that we would do. And so I tried all the different products available, and I found one that did a really great job of taking out for demixing. You know, if it's basically you feed a program a finished mixed song, and it will separate into the multi-tracks, the vocals, the drums, the guitar, piano, with varying degrees of success. But it worked for me because it just took the vocals out nice and cleanly, and then I could manipulate that, take off the distortion, and add it back to the song. So, you know, like when Cheryl would say, make it better, you know, I love a challenge. So I would try to figure out a way to make it better.
It's funny because all these years later, I still read my own press, which is stupid. But it's always it's also informative, right? And I saw somebody on some thread say about this record, well, I'm not going to get it because I've heard it's too futzed with, digitally, right? And I'm like, well, either you don't get to hear this or you hear it somewhat futzed with. I mean, some of the stuff you had to do some gymnastics on, I know. But to me, we didn't get in the way of any songs or manipulate them in a way that they move away from their initial performance. We don't rewrite history. We make it available to be heard. And I would rather know these songs than worry about how much compression I might, or that there might be a digital artifact left behind.
If anything I do starts to make a song sound unnatural, I will always live with the noise. Yeah. So if it's a hiss or a buzz or whatever, if my fix makes it sound any way artificial, I'd stop it and I'd leave the problem in.
And then I'd call him and say, find another way.
Well, one song that's so nice, we've got it twice. Too much sugar for a dime.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Boy, really very different versions of the same song.
And that was sort of an accident also. Yeah. Back in the, if you
Way
remember,
to go, Mike.
If you remember what I was saying back in the beginning, I got these files with just these non-descriptive names, and Cheryl, we have a long list, and I'm sure she told me correctly. I just pulled the wrong song, but she wanted Too Much Sugar for a Dime, and I pulled the who was it?
Homer Banks.
Homer Banks instead of Betty Crutcher. And sent it, and she said, this is the wrong one, but it's great. But wait, listen to the Betty Crutcher. Oh, it's great too.
Yeah, that was another one where I was just so conflicted because they both express the song so differently. And they're also two people that worked closely together. I think it was Homer Banks and Raymond Jackson that wrote the song. And they were part of a writing trio that also included Betty. And the first demo, that's more the raw songwriting demo, the vocal is by Homer Banks. But then it seems like Betty Crutcher cut it. She only released one album on Stax ever, which also blows my mind. But I think this song is probably an outtake from that record, which is also inexcusable and inexplicable to me because it is great. It would have been a hit. There was another song that we used two versions of. Mm-hmm. So, this is a really good example of how we work together. I mean, I have fun on Mike a lot, but the fact of the matter is it wasn't a mistake that he sent that to me because I was conflicted about which one to use anyway. And hearing his enthusiasm for both versions, I just said, well, screw it. Let's use this as an example on the project of how different a song can be interpreted, and I thought that was important to demonstrate as well, because we are talking about demos and we are talking about interpretations of compositions,
And they're both great.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's no one is not lesser.
In fact, I called that and the Staple Singers thing. I called Concord back up because I had it as a 6 CD set, and I called them back up and I said, I think I need to make it 7. Can I? And they said, we've already gone this far. So, and that was great because I had all these ones that were sort of on the bubble that wouldn't leave me alone. They were proactive with pitchforks and torches. They were coming after me saying, do not leave me off. And so it gave me room to kind of relax the concept, because when you're producing something like this, you put up guardrails, right? You make your own set of rules by which things fit, so you can explain to people what it is, right? I mean, it's very basic in some ways, but there's a rigidity to it that serves a really important purpose. But in this one, once it started kind of exploding out a little bit, and they gave me that extra disc, it felt really great because although it was confusing to Mike because he had to go back and redo everything again. Sorry. But I think it made the project better because it gave us some more angles by which to view songwriter demos.
Betty Crutcher is just amazing to hear. And I did some research, and you mentioned she wrote with Raymond Jackson and Homer Banks, and said they're amazingly successful writers.
Yeah.
It said they accounted for like $6 million in sales. That would be like 45 million by our standards today. Yeah. Just an incredible amount of stuff that they did. So very interesting to hear all that. Here's a name that came up earlier in one of our shows just recently, and it surprisingly came up on Stax, and I didn't know it would come up on Stax, and that's Delaney Bramlett.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So Told You for the Last Time is the song, and it was later recorded by Eric Clapton and for his first solo record.
Right.
So interesting to hear Delaney Bramlett as a part of this project.
Yeah, well, remember they had Delaney and Bonnie had a record called Home on Stax, and I think they probably spent a good amount of time at Muscle Shoals, right? Mm-hmm. And so they were in the area and not strangers to Stax, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Eddie Floyd worked with him a bit, and it's interesting because Eddie comes out of Detroit with Wilson Pickett and Mac Rice. So it's to me it's just another example. There's Memphis. It's on a river. All the music is flowing through from all over, right? And but when I found that one, it's one of the I'm truly not a giant Eric Clapton fan, and but that's one of the songs that he cut that I really do enjoy, and so to find the demo by Delaney was really interesting to me. I'm like, it's probably that Stax affiliation as to why I like this song, cut by this British rock dude. Right?
He also very famously kind of appropriated Delaney Bramlett's singing voice.
Yeah.
That was very influenced by that. But
yeah.
Of course, this is all before he besmirched his reputation, but we won't go there. Every once in a while, I hear a Fender Telecaster pop in that is so recognizable to me, and it's Steve Cropper.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while I hear that come in, and it's just, you just know.
Yeah.
I mean, when you hear those cats, when it's Duck Dunn or Steve Cropper or Al Jackson, Booker T, I mean, like you say, they were down the hall, probably maybe walking by.
Yeah.
Hey, come in.
Well, it's amazing when you have an instrumentalist that the second, a note comes out of a guitar, it's Richard Thompson. Right? Or, like you're saying, any of the guys in the MGs, right? Yeah. Everything that they did after. The second you hear a note from Steve Cropper or from Booker, that's that person. And that's to me is rare. I really don't there's only so many people that can make an instrument that unique, I feel, to themselves.
Yeah.
It's not that there aren't a lot of extraordinary players. I just don't think there's that many that, seriously, like any song that Richard Thompson has played on, I'm like, oh yeah, it's Richard Thompson. And that's hard to do.
Yeah, and it's not with Cropper. It's not gear intensive. I mean, he's playing by basically a Telecaster through a Fender Harvard Tweed amp.
Yeah.
But
there's a cleanliness
Yeah.
and a drive to his playing that it's strong and it's singular and it's just Steve Cropper. It's just end all be all, and what an achievement that guy's career is, because as a songwriter, as somebody who is a producer and a player, it just unbelievable. Some people I wish I could just see like what they saw for a minute when they were in the studio.
Yeah. The multitasking is interesting when you talk about what Cropper does.
Yeah.
And Bobby Manuel's another person who I guess he engineered and did different things. Later on in his career, of course, he produced Disco Duck with Rick Dees. And for which we will forgive him because
towering achievement. Yeah. No, he was Isaac Hayes' guitar player. And he's been wonderful because he remembers everything. And when we were sitting at that round table, I'd start playing a song. He's like, oh, that's in B. He's like, because the drums sounded like this. And, the bass sounded like this because you couldn't get drums in that room and blah, 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 blah. And as soon as he would say something like that, like Mr. Bell would be like, oh, yeah, But he's really sharp. And he and Miss Parker sat down with me going through the Stax photo archive, and they were just wonderful because not only did I get some really great stories, but they were able to really identify a whole lot of people, and in turn we were able to get some, because of both of them and the efforts of Robert Gordon, we were able to get some pictures that nobody's seen before, which is really cool.
There's some really great videos that Stax produced with Bobby Manuel, Henderson Thigpen, Deanie Parker and Eddie Floyd.
Eddie, yeah.
You should look them up. There's like 24 or so of them. They're just fantastic. Just hearing them talk and tell these stories.
Yeah, all about this project. It's on YouTube, and I think it's on the Stax channel. It's great.
Hearing Eddie Floyd is just a revelation. Is that like the greatest soul singer in the world?
Yeah.
I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, and the songs are amazing. Talk about another songwriter that's just unbelievable. And I went into this project, we know knock on wood. Yeah. Right?
Of course.
But oh my God, the songs he wrote.
There's a song in here called Stay With Me. It's the song I play for anybody. It's the first song. You want to hear what this sounds like? Well, listen to this. And anybody listening to this, go onto Spotify or whatever. Yeah. Put on Stay With Me.
By Eddie Floyd.
And turn it up.
Yeah. Turn it way up.
And that song was covered famously. Is that correct? Is that the same song? No.
That song was never cut. Never released.
Oh my God.
Same with Too Much Sugar for a Dime. How is that possible? I mean, these are hits.
Yeah. But you mentioned this. Stax had to rebuild a catalog. Yeah. Right. So because there was some funky business stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the early part of the catalog, when I cite that date where it split, Stax had signed a distribution deal with Atlantic Records, which turned out there was some fine print. Read your contracts. Fine print that said, oh, and by the way, we also own this all. And so when they separated, being distributed through Atlantic, they had no catalog, and they were going through, and they had nothing to sell, and they had a publishing company, and so the publishing company was still making some money, right? Because the songs were on all of the Atlantic records, but everything else was gone. So they did something called the Soul Explosion, and you can find old ads for it. They had a big sales convention to roll this out. It was all hands on deck, 24/7, writing songs and putting records together to get their catalog back. And I think I want to say they released like 26 albums at once or something. And so a good amount of demos that are on this collection come from the Soul Explosion. And it's great, It's they made some great music under extreme duress, but then they rolled into this second phase of Stax, which really saw the rise of the staple singers and Isaac Hayes, and what rose out of the ashes was in some ways more powerful than the first phase, because the first phase, remember, you're starting in the late 50s through the later 60s, and you have a lot of sort of girl group sound things and things that had kind of become part of a pop culture that was passing quickly at the time, and by the time you get to the late 60s, you have Vietnam in it's full blown. You've got the civil rights movement full blown, and Dr. King was very close to a lot of the people at Stax, and so things had taken on a lot different shades and colors and more difficult times, and the music reflected that. And so the split in 68, everything, just, I mean, think about it historically. Everything that came after was just much more difficult, especially in Memphis, right, where Dr. King was assassinated that year. So things changed radically.
Yeah, it was a segregated world. Obviously, Memphis is a part of the South, but as always, music overrode all of those elements. I mean, when we heard bands, like the Marqués or, the MGs, and to see, the writers that were involved in these projects, it's really, really interesting. What surprised you the most? What really just jumped out of the woodwork and just surprised you?
I think the fact that that this material existed in the quality that it did. I was shocked. When I talk about those last 3 discs, I don't know why some of those songs didn't get cut, right? So the surprising thing to me, and I talked with Robert about this quite a bit, because I was talking to him about this. He and Deanie were with me from the outset on this project. And, as I started finding some of these songs, like Too Much Sugar for a Dime, or a lot of the really unbelievable songs on those 3 discs, is how did these things not get cut? Yeah. And Robert's idea about that is basically, it was such an embarrassment of riches that, somebody wrote something else, they put their tape on the pile, and it, Too Much Sugar for a Dime got lower in the box. When somebody was looking for something, they pulled the tape off and said, well, we need another track for this album. We're just imagining a box of demos, and they're rooting around, and that tape never got pulled out. And that's all that I can think, because I can't imagine that some of the songs on those last 3 discs would have been rejected by anybody. So that, to me, that was surprising. Is just what an embarrassment of riches this whole thing turned out to be.
We were talking to Michael before you came in, and he's kind of got his schedule sort of mapped out for a number of months in advance. And I remember, Cheryl, when we interviewed you initially for this in our first season, you were telling me that Omnivore was like doing like 1 release a week. I remember going,
yeah, we do that.
How in the world with this thing? Yeah. And I know we're talking about the Stax project here, but there were just a couple things I wanted to ask you about, if I could, that I'm aware of. And one is the Janis Joplin.
Oh, sure.
With Jorma Kaukonen.
Yeah.
And an unexpected musical instrument on the track.
Yeah.
And it's called the typewriter tape.
Yeah, the legendary typewriter tape.
Tell us about that.
Well, and this was a perfect one. On the Stax set, there are projects that I couldn't do years ago because I didn't have Mike, right? Uh-huh. This is why we're just we're stuck with each other, and even projects we have done together, we could do better now because technology is advancing so rapidly. And the Janis one is a perfect example. I had those recordings. It was a 1964 rehearsal at Yorma's house, and his wife is typing in the background, and the TV is on, right? But and
it's a loft too, so there's no shortage of echo.
Right, and the tape deck, he was running a little reel to reel, was sitting, and Mike was sitting closer to his guitar, and on the right, I think, and Janice was off to the left.
It was mono, so I don't know.
Right. Well,
it was farther away.
Further away. But I just, like, in imagining myself in that room, I always kind of felt like, I kind of knew where things were in the soundscape. But then we got the opportunity to actually put that out legitimately. I'd had it as a bootleg for years, right? It just got traded among fans. And the manager of the estate called and said, "Hey, are you interested in doing this? Do you know about this recording?" And I'm like, "That's awesome. I would love to take a crack at that, and I know exactly what it is." So we got a pretty decent transfer.
It took a while. We almost went with I don't know. It wasn't a great transfer, but we finally got a really good DAT. Yay for DATs.
Yeah,
again,
early '90s DAT transfer.
People are hard on DATs, but sometimes they save the day. But yeah, we got a really good recording of it. Yeah. I forgot there were some buzzes, some normal things that I deal with to try to clean it up. But we had all the boots. Cheryl, of course, is a collector, and I downloaded whatever was out there, and they were all pretty horrible. This sounded so much better, but being so pristine and clear, the typewriter was way up front. I mean, you couldn't hear anything. It was the typewriter, and then that was the star. They get typewriter as top billing. So I talked about demixing earlier. This was the first time I tried it, and it was such a sparse recording. I did it, and it worked out great. It separated. I had the vocal track, I had a typewriter track, and I had the guitar track. And I didn't. The thing about demixing, you can. If you listen to each individual track, you will hear the shortcomings of the technology. It sounds like a really bad MP3, watery sounds, and all that stuff. But if you know how to hide that stuff, it's really useful. So what I did was, I could take the typewriter out, and it sounded good, but we all know this is the typewriter tape, so I can't do that. But I can turn the typewriter down a little bit, right? And I can bring up Janice's vocals so that it matches Jorma's guitar. So we had a balanced recording now. We're still in that room in New York City, but we're not quite so lopsided.
But I think we were able to put things a little bit better in the soundscape, right?
Yeah. Kept it mono.
For sure, yeah. And again, this is a real prime example of us. We're not trying to change history,
right?
We're no interest in making a Dolby Atmos mix out of this, right?
Out of anything.
Out of anything.
But
just want to make sure whatever this recording we have is impactful and connects with people, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah. It's great to hear Janice under those conditions, and especially that young and her with the youth in her voice. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the typewriter's in tune.
And elegantly played.
Elegantly played. Cool. The other thing, I believe you worked on an Aretha Franklin project recently?
Sure. Yeah, we did that for BMG. I consult to a lot of companies. And that one came to us in a real funny way, because the repertoire belongs to obviously Atlantic Warner Music Group, but BMG decided they wanted to do this, and in true Cheryl fashion, I made them go back and ask for more than what they were given to do, but I wanted to make something more comprehensive. They had the opportunity to work with her early-ish 70s albums, and I said, well, everybody has these records. What do you? And they're like, well, make it make sense. And I'm like, well, okay, but go back and get all of the session stuff that's scattered all over the place, right? It's like I had produced some stuff in the past. There were a lot of compilations and box sets where a demo or an outtake or an alternate mix or a single version would sneak out on. If you get this one, it's called Portrait of the Queen. It's I Never Loved a Man up through 74.
It's right there.
Right before.
I can pull it out. We can look at it.
Never mind. It's the studio records from the early 70s, and But now everything that has been issued from the sessions for those records is in one place. So you don't have to buy 12 box sets and a couple compilations and find an original single just to get that edit. You know, it's all in one place.
So the Aretha Franklin, the Janis Joplin, the Stax, someone who does what I do for a living, I'm only as good as the producer that I'm working with. And Cheryl always brings the best.
That's very nice.
And it was very nice what you said about me too, but I should be clear now that we're a pretty good team.
Yeah.
So,
well, I partner with people who can take it.
one release a week.
Well, but also, we get a crack at doing these things. I want them to be as completely great as possible, and
Me too.
you are relentless with that. And so, but here's the difference, right? Stax, that was stuff that might as well have been thrown away, because it was, unless somebody crazy came along like me that wanted to spend all the time sifting it out of this enormous amount of audio, it's gone. It might as well be gone, right? Something like the Aretha, though, that's like a gift to. This is my gift to Mike, because he got to use the original analog masters for those those albums.
Sometimes I get tapes. And I'm very happy.
Well, the two of you, obviously, we look forward to whatever's coming next, and it's incredible. But in the meantime, everything you do, and especially written in their soul, the Stax Songwriter Demos is a phenomenal project, and we appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today.
Well, thank you.
Storyophonic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Storyophonic. Please follow us and rate us on your favorite listening platforms. Tune in for new shows and check out past episodes. Storyophonic is produced and mixed by Lindsay Tomasic. Our production director is Kim Strand. Our theme music is by Dadalite Mine. And I'm your host, Dan Kimbell.